I'm aware of it's nearly 260,000. I'm asking for the number of providers that have collapsed in the last 3 years.
And we don't collect that data at an individual level. The only data that we have is the total number of providers who are making claims, and where a provider is a registered provider, we do have numbers about how many registered providers have exited the market.
Right. Well, in total, you've got about 64 million that is owed to the unpaid tax in superannuation and wages from providers that have actually collapsed. That's $64 million. And that's why I'm asking, and I want to know what you're doing about it.
So we don't have information about their tax that relates to how much unpaid tax or superannuation that an individual provider would have. There'd be questions for other departments. We don't collect that.
But you must know that you've got providers on your books that these organisations have collapsed. One, for a case in point, is Cocoon collapsed and left the debt of payments owing millions. Now, if you're allowing these people to get on your books and act as a provider or a company or a business and that type of thing, that's taxpayers' dollars that are paying them. These are either scams or your governance of your organisation is hopeless. So which is it?
Senator, John Dardo, and I am very aware of the issue you're raising, and I'm very concerned about the issue that you're raising.
Can I just ask the nameplates be put up? Sorry, it just makes it easy for us to reference who's at the desk. Sorry to interrupt.
I might continue while that's coming.
Yeah.
The first thing to note is that under current tax secrecy provisions, the tax office is not allowed to share data with us before we register a provider or before we pay a provider. So that is just something that is not allowed under current tax secrecy provisions. So even if we wanted to see that today, before we register or before we pay a provider, we are not allowed to see that. In the Fraud Fusion Task Force, Senator, we have created the ability to see tax data for very specific cases that are referred into the Fraud Fusion Task Force, and we treat those cases holistically, including having the tax office. We refer cases to the tax office, and we have the tax office work with us to treat those cases. We've been very transparent about this gap in the law, and we went to, it was included in a consultation paper that was distributed in December 2024 by Treasury on the tax secrecy provisions, and there was commentary provided by the sector, by the professional associations, the accountant professions and others on the fact that secrecy provision exists and what the future may look like. But I just want to be really transparent. That is not a new thing. That's always been a thing. And unless the law is changed, we will not be allowed to know the tax circumstances of a provider before we register or pay them.
I'm quite well aware of that. So what I'm saying is, if you've got all these businesses that are folding, going under, owing millions of dollars, so along the way you have not done your job properly in having a clear governance over how this money is spent, especially when organisations get to millions of dollars that is owed, not only to the tax debts, but other debts and payments and wages. That is taxpayers' dollars. Now, I've asked you questions now for a figure. I've got the figures here of 22, 23, 23, 24 of fraud payments. Now, you tell me that it's probably a lot bigger than what you said, because it's $77 million over 2 years. You won't give me the fraud figures for 24, 25. You are moving the goalposts, you're moving definitions, you're not being upfront with the Australian people of what's going on. That's only recorded what you've caught them out to proven or in the courts. How much more fraud is going on there that you're not telling the Australian taxpayer? We're talking about a $52 to $55 billion industry that is going to blow out to $100 billion by 2032. And I know constantly I'm hearing from people the number of scams that's going on. I'll ask you this, this question also. The NDIS Integrity Program blocked $86 million in payments in 24-25. What are you going to do to rein in and eradicate this fraudulent behaviour? If you've picked this up to block it, why did they get to a stage that they can actually be providers? So is it, again, your governance?
So I think, just to be very, very transparent, there are multiple layers of work that we're doing to give us an assurance that providers that are working in the scheme are the right providers. For registered providers, and keep in mind there's the difference between registered and unregistered. For registered providers, we have now improved the way we identity proof them. We've improved the way we identity proof their staff, so we know who we're dealing with. There is a lot more work happening in identifying those providers that need to be removed at an earlier point in time because of their claiming. As I shared earlier, we've taken out at least 2,500 of those that have previously claimed $5 billion, and we've stopped them from being able to claim. We are referring to the tax office every provider that we think has a problem with their affairs. We are referring them to other agencies if they've been involved in any other agency process, and we're using the Fraud Fusion Task Force to take them out. We're referring to the Commission for the Commission to treat through a range of mechanisms. The breadth of the interventions is unprecedented. It's never been done in any government program in history. And some of these interventions never existed before we built them in the Fraud Fusion Task Force. On top of that, we are, there is work that will happen, in reform about unregistered providers and what they may need to look like in the future. And so as we go forward, we have, a forward work plan about how we make payments more transparent, so we can see the bank account that they're going to for every provider, and so that we can report that information to the tax office in a more timely way. And so that will mean the tax office will be able to see that. We are already working on that design, and we're already building the systems for that. But there is no doubt that there are things that we are not allowed to see and not allowed to do today under current law. We are not allowed to see today, for the 270,000 providers, something that indicates for us whether they have or haven't paid tax for the last year or the last 3 years. We are not allowed to see that by law. That is not a fault of the NDIS or the NDIA administering it. That is just a fact of law. So
is that government policy?
It's been the law for decades. So that is the current state of the law. As I said, the consultation has occurred around what that may or may not look like, but the question that you're asking, that limitation is a limitation of the law, not our administration.
Then I